Hey everybody, Trey here. We've got another severe weather threat on tap for today. This time it is draped across southern Arkansas into northern Mississippi, into the sort of the western half of Tennessee. Much different setup than what we've seen the last couple of weeks with our high risk events, but still going to be a significant threat for severe weather today, especially in the enhanced risk zone there. There's a 10% hatched tornado area. Potential for a strong tornado within that region is on the table, as well as a damaging wind and very large hail threat, especially farther down southwest into southern Arkansas. So let's go ahead and get started today. Here's our satellite view, kind of zoomed out here. You'll notice we have this complex of storms ongoing here in Tennessee, far northern Mississippi. We can take a look at the radar there and see that pretty heavy rain this morning. We are staying in Memphis tonight, and this morning we were woken up by the thunder this morning. It was pretty heavy rain, flash flood warnings across the area, across the Memphis metro area. That has since moved off to the east, and there's kind of these popcorn showers that continue to fire here in northern Mississippi and southwest Tennessee. This is all due to a warm advection regime that's ongoing. You can see in the satellite there these lower level clouds streaming northward as warm advection continues to pump that warm moist air northward. We'll take a look at our surface map now. We'll refresh it here to get the latest update. You can see sort of back here across sort of the Red River area. There's a surface low kind of back in this region. You can kind of see broad cyclonic flow around that surface low. And there's kind of a warm front that's draped kind of somewhat in this area, roughly. And south of that boundary, you can see winds out of the south here across Mississippi, Louisiana, southern Arkansas. That's going to pump these 70s, lower 70s, upper 60s dew points northward throughout the day. This warm front is likely going to stall somewhere in this region, and as that convection continues potentially throughout the morning hours in the sort of central Tennessee area, western Tennessee, northern Mississippi, that warm front is kind of going to be reinforced and not going to be able to advance farther northward. So wherever this warm front stalls out is where there's going to be sort of a maximized severe weather threat, especially as we go into late afternoon and early evening. Right along that warm front, winds a little bit more back to the north of it, a little bit more out of the south to the south of that, a little bit more vorticity to work with along that front could maximize the tornado threat later tonight. But let's go ahead and take a look at the overall picture here. We'll go zoom out to our full United States map here. 500 millibar flow. We have another sort of big positively tilted trough out here across Arizona and New Mexico. Kind of a jet streak rounding the base of that. And then kind of this broad sort of fetch of stronger mid-level flow here from all the way from Oklahoma and Kansas up into the northeast part of the United States. There's kind of this broad, almost zonal, mostly zonal flow here across the region. This region of this trough is going to hang back here, and this is actually going to be sort of a more weakly forced event because we're not going to get the total influence from this trough back here. So the winds are going to kind of stay out of the west-southwest and the west here across the enhanced risk area today, and we're kind of going to have to rely, it looks like, somewhat on warm advection, potentially the lift near the surface warm front, and maybe a subtle perturbation aloft to get storms to fire here in the severe weather risk area today. So it's not going to be your sort of highly forced events that we've seen the past couple of weeks for our high risk days where we have a very potent trough impinging on the region. It's just going to kind of be this broad fetch with sort of embedded perturbations within that that's going to get the job done today. We'll go down to 850 millibars and zoom back into the southeast here. You'll notice this morning we've got a very broad area of 30 to 40 knot winds here at 850 millibars. That should remain kind of in place throughout the day. And then after dark, as is typical, we should get a really significant ramp up in the low-level jet, which, with any discrete convection ongoing, we could develop a tornado threat, potentially a strong tornado threat, especially near that warm front, as that low-level jet starts to strengthen significantly after dark. Quick look at the soundings. Observe 12Z soundings here. We'll start in Little Rock here. Little Rock appears to have been just north of the front at 12Z, 7 a.m. Central Daylight Time. You can see the inversion there. Cooler air at the surface. It's only 57 degrees. Lots of elevated instability though, and that is likely what fueled the storms this morning and continues to fuel the storms this morning. We'll go to Nashville as well. You can see that is also to the north of the front, cooler air at the surface there as well, but lots of elevated instability to allow those storms to continue. And we have some decent turning in the low levels and some stronger winds aloft, which prompted those storms to become just barely severe this morning, with strong winds and large hail. Let's go down into the warm sector now into Mississippi, and this is a pretty solid sounding for the morning of a severe weather event. We've got a pretty deep, moist boundary layer there, 72 over 68. Boundary layer extends almost up to 850 millibars, and we've got a plume of steep lapse rates aloft, a little bit drier air there, sort of that elevated mixed layer that will help suppress warm sector convection throughout the day. You can see the hodograph's already fairly large, pretty decently looping in the low levels there already. Effective helicity of 260 there at Jackson this morning. So you can see that warm advection is ongoing. We do have a profile conducive for severe storms later on, assuming that cap breaks, and we should get some sunshine to the south of that warm front in the open warm sector. Here, Birmingham, just for good measure, much of the same, very deep moist boundary layer. A deep moist layer there as well, up to about 850 millibars. Then that kind of leftover elevated mixed layer. But lots of elevated instability in place with these large looping hodographs that will only become even more looped, especially in the low levels as we get into late afternoon and early evening as the low level jet ramps up. So severe storm profile already in place across the region to the south of that warm front. So that's a good sign for chasers here today that we could see storms later on this evening approach severe levels. So let's look at some model data real quick here. This is the 12Z NAM coming in right now. You can see that fetch of stronger winds aloft extending from the central plains into the northeast. And you'll notice as we go through the day that we're really not going to get that trough to impinge on the region too much. It's going to be this area of enhanced winds aloft, that especially the southern portion of that coincides with that warm front, and areas just south of that that's going to help kick off storms. And you can see even almost a little bit of ridging aloft, a little bit of anticyclonic flow there aloft. So it's very much a weakly forced event, very different than what we had on Thursday and then a couple Wednesdays ago for our high-risk events where you had the trough impinging on the region directly. Going to be more subtle today. And these are the kind of events in Dixie Alley that really tend to overperform when you get very zonal flow, very weakly forced, very weak forcing aloft, very subtle. These tend to prompt a little bit more of a discrete storm mode. And with that EML in place that we saw on our soundings this morning, that those two again are kind of things that I look for in Dixie Alley setups for at least those higher end, more discrete supercell tornado events. We'll zoom in here now, look at the 850 millibar pattern, how it evolves throughout the day. You can see the low level jet already in place there. It's going to kind of stay in place throughout the day, and then right about 0Z, you can see it starts to really ramp up there, especially across southeast Arkansas, northern Mississippi, into the western half of Tennessee, and then really does so about 6Z just after midnight. So if we have any discrete storms ongoing, which I would expect at least the initial mode to be very much a discrete storm mode, given the weak forcing and sort of random nature of and subtle nature of the forcing, storms should be discrete. There should be a decent window for discrete storms there. Then as that low-level jet ramps up, we should definitely see the hodograph start to enlarge and potentially have that strong tornado threat near or after sunset right along that warm front especially. So we'll take a look at the moisture there. You can see continues to pump northward south of that warm front as that low-level jet continues to pump the moisture northward. Take a look at 21Z here, a couple of soundings. We'll take one just on the warm front there. We'll take a couple in the open warm sector down here along the Mississippi Delta, down in Arkansas. And you can see large instability, large low-level instability as well, 0 to 3 kilometer cape of 150 almost there in southwest Tennessee. Very unstable profile, deep moist layer, and a adequately looping and large hodograph for potentially tornadic supercells there by mid to late afternoon. Southwest Arkansas, very unstable as well, large low-level instability also. Hodograph's not quite as favorable. It'll kind of be on the backside of that little perturbation aloft. If we go back to 500 millibars here, you can kind of see there's our main sort of perturbation there. Southwest Arkansas kind of going to be on the fringes of that. Right ahead of that is where I'd expect to see the hodograph sort of maximize there, and the largest there. And as that moves off, Southwest Arkansas kind of going to be on the backside of that southern portion of Arkansas. Better, much more favorable, right ahead of that in sort of western Tennessee and northern Mississippi. So that might be why we're not quite seeing as good of hodographs here. Also, the low-level jet axis might be a little bit off to the east. Well, I guess not. Might have just something to do with maybe some I don't know. That's odd. I would expect the hodographs to be pretty solid there as well, but definitely adequate for severe storms. And you'll notice here that surface winds are actually fairly weak, but that doesn't really matter if you've got very strong low-level jet ongoing. That'll really enlarge those hodographs in lieu of having strong surface winds. So that's one thing to keep in mind, that today's not really a day to write off just because the surface winds are a little bit weaker than usual. So let's move on to 0Z. We'll try to get soundings that aren't quite as contaminated here because there should be convection ongoing by this point. Yep, there you go. Lots of convection ongoing there in Tennessee along the warm front. Let's try to pick a sounding a little bit farther east ahead of the convection so we're not contaminated. And there you go. We're still fairly unstable there with a looping hodograph there. Southwest Arkansas, a little bit more of an odd hodograph there, at least on this NAM run. Might be some influence of convection there. There should be quite a few storms ongoing by this point, so a little bit hard to pick a completely clean sounding. And you can see those dew points get eaten up right where those storms are. This is at 3Z. Let's try to pick a sounding out ahead of those storms along the warm front. And yeah, it's hard to find a sounding that's not quite contaminated. Maybe a little bit farther south we'll try, but there should be quite a few storms ongoing. This one a little bit less contaminated, and you can see still adequately unstable, and then the hodographs really start to enlarge here by about 3Z as our sort of winds about a kilometer off the ground, approaching 40 to 50 knots there as the low-level jet increases. So something to watch, especially as we go into the overnight hours. All right, some cams. We'll go through some cams here just to kind of close things out here. We'll take a look at the 12Z HRRR run. You can see that complex of storms here ongoing across Tennessee. That should move off throughout the day, and we should, with such strong warm advection in place, we should get these kind of popcorn showers throughout the day. Again, that warm front should be kind of reinforced here across maybe the Tennessee-Mississippi border into central Arkansas, southwest Arkansas. You can see storms start to gain a little bit of strength here by mid-afternoon, especially right along that warm front. You can see a couple of these storms try to anchor on the warm front, and those would have the best potential, at least during the afternoon hours, to produce tornadoes. Then back here into Arkansas, the Arklatex region, we've got storms as well. Mainly going to be a hail threat down there, I would imagine, given not quite as favorable hodographs down there for tornadoes. I would expect the greatest tornado threat to be along the warm front. And then you can see we kind of have this a little bit more of a messy mode here later on. If any storms can stay semi-discrete, especially up here near the warm front, there would be definitely a tornado threat. So we'll have to watch that. But again, looks like storms are going to be somewhat semi-discrete here by late afternoon, early evening as they first form. Should have a few hour window for discrete storms there. We'll go to the ARW here. That's just coming in, 12Z run. And you can see by mid-afternoon, once again, we have these kind of beans forming right along the warm front. Would have to watch those for a tornado threat near the boundary there. And then by 22Z, we've got the storms start to perk up there. A couple of potentially tornadic storms here in southwest Tennessee. Back here in Arkansas, again, more potentially of a large hail threat. But as the low-level jet ramps up, could not rule out a tornado and even a strong one there. Then we get a little bit more messy as the night goes on. But then finally, NSSL WRF here. Kind of the same thing, lots of sort of beans going up here by 21, 22Z, northern Mississippi. A couple of beans maybe out ahead of this, try to produce here. And then this goes a little bit more messy more quickly. But again, I think given the subtle nature of the forcing, there should be a few hour window for discrete storms before things get a little bit more messy. So final product we'll look at is our, I call it the cheat code. It's our short range ensemble forecast, significant tornado parameters. And you'll notice right there, sort of along the warm front, they really start to you really start to see that enhanced area there from northern Mississippi, southwest Tennessee down into the Arklatex region. And then pretty clear by 0Z where the highest threat, highest overlap of ingredients is right there along the warm front into northern Mississippi, southeast Arkansas, southwest Tennessee. So potent storms likely today across the region. Again, a strong tornado threat is on the table, especially with storms near that warm front. Given large looping hodographs, a very strong low-level jet near and after sunset should foster that strong tornado threat. Large hail also going to be an issue and damaging winds once storms congeal into a convective complex later on in the evening. So if you're in this region, keep your weather radios handy. Stay tuned to the most accurate local information from your National Weather Service offices. And that's all I've got for now. So if you're chasing today, stay safe, and we will see you in the next video.